absolutely magnificent work, Arne. It's always such a joy and a terror to get a score that is this incredibly well constructed, well thought out, and inspired because, the joy is to see somebody put themselves into their work with such intelligence, such a genius for that particular period, and so on. The terror is, trying to find something useful to say, but I'm sure that I will find it. In fact, my first comment is going to be right here. You have your layout and so on. I'm before I really get into my enhanced evaluation. Let's talk about some of the features here that are really that really stand out beautifully in this first movement. So here we've got natural horns 1 and 2 in F, 3 and 4 in C basso. We've got natural trumpets in F and so on. Timpani in C and F. All right. So you really made a standout effort here to really play by the rules of natural horn scoring. You have a few stopped pitches and so on, but really it hangs together quite beautifully. And I would say the same thing is true for your F trumpets, right? And true to form, you use your trombones, especially alto and tenor trombones, to supply those kind of mid-range pitches that are outside of the tuning of your natural brass. So really, just very delightful, very, very nicely done. Despite the fact that you have, you really are kind of holding to only 2 kettles, you're still, like that would be for the period, right? Just having a couple of kettles. Occasionally you would see something, with a little bit more, maybe in like opera. So yeah, you probably noticed that for the mock-up, I conjoined your screens together just so that it would be easier, like the visual flow would be better. But for our evaluation, let's go back to the score that you supplied to me, just because some things are in context. Now let's talk a little bit. Let's get into our enhanced evaluation. Here you say, strings are always considered non-Davies due to the smaller ensemble size. Okay, so what about this is inherently smaller, right? Are you thinking to yourself, well, like those period, the period of that, the strings of that period would of course naturally be smaller, so I'm going to just take it for granted that, that certain pitches or certain, intervals are always going to be non-Davies, right? But I don't think you can count on that. I would just submit to you that, like, let's say that this piece does get performed by an orchestra, say like, whoever's available to you, right? Like, let's say you get like a regional orchestra to play this, like your city orchestra or something like that will read it or rehearse it or even perform it. I will bet you anything that they will take certain pitches, like they might play certain pitches as, as triple stops, like obvious ones like this one. But they might decide to divide up other pitches, other intervals, other chords. So I would just say you are not out of the woods. I wouldn't just, I wouldn't use that as a stopgap just to say, well, smaller ensemble size, so so look, just assume everything is non-Davies. Because there are a few things that, I would much rather see my players take on as Davies, like this, for instance. These octaves in here, just so much easier. I mean, they're possible. Like these these octaves are possible, non-Davies, but still, And then just like, is this really worth fussing over to get the violist to get into that position and so on, and I mean, not that it's difficult or anything. That would be an open D and so on. You're being pretty pretty polite to them. But then here we've got to go to like a C third and then a C sharp third. That's a little bit more, a little bit more difficult. So yeah, so I think you should rethink that. All right, I think you should assume that you're going to have the option of having Davies and non-Davies and everything else. So I think the things that are not obviously non-Davies, you should mark non-Davies. The things that are obviously non-Davies, triple stops and so on, don't worry about so much. But like there are certain things in here that I would definitely try to make it easier for the players. Okay, and then of course follow it by unison. So that's my thoughts about that. So let's keep going with the general feedback here. It's funny. I was so used to staring at the conjoined screens together. I'm kind of like thinking, where am I in this? It's all right. So you got box text sort of saying, okay, well, this part is going to be like a string quartet, right? And then I think later on you've got a wind quintet marked. All right. Okay, so unless you are the conductor of this ensemble, I would avoid that because, in fact, I just would avoid it in general because you never know, like you cannot judge the patience and the perspicacity of the orchestration management on any given day, right? Like you are assuming that they're going to look at this and say, oh yeah, no, this is a place where, like our principal players play a little quartet and isn't that lovely, right? But the problem is that this might get looked at and orchestration management might say, what, they want us to hire a string quartet too? Oh, forget it. Do you see what I'm saying? You're setting yourself up to be rejected arbitrarily on a point that that just makes no sense. So yeah, so look, just really, really, try to be standard about certain things, just for your own self protection. Okay, is what I'm trying to say. Because like your score is so worth it, right? Why put it at risk? Okay. Now, there are some things in here. You've got the half stopping on your Fs, your F naturals in your F horns. You've got these marked as like a half stop. You've got like the plus and the circle, right? So here's the thing about that is that like if this gets played by like actual natural horns, then they don't need this because they know how to stop or half stop an F, right? So they don't need it. If you are going to have this played by modern instruments, and you would actually rather have this note sound beautiful, right? And just absolutely clear, then you also don't need this marking. However, the only time that you would ever need this half stop marking would be if you want the essence, that sort of slightly muddy, hissy kind of a sound up there, right? So if you want that half-stop sound to sort of preserve the authenticity, or not, or what, you want to try to bring over that sense of period, then yeah, so then I would say include it. Otherwise, just leave it out. All right, and then there was this other kind of general thing, and that is, here we're tootling along at, bar 37 and, 38, 39, and suddenly we're at 74. It looks like your application decided to kind of double the the numbers when it got to the repeat and so on. But but that's kind of strange that this should be 74, right? Because that's twice 37, right? So it doesn't even make sense in terms of in terms of like adding bars because of the repeat. So just really, this should be this should be done according to the standard, right? Like just whatever, this is just the next bar in number depending on how you manage your first and second endings, how you count them, right? But don't go double on us or give us a weird number that doesn't make sense with you know what I'm saying, like, because it can just really cause confusion in rehearsal. Let's say that there was a page turn like this, and then the conductor might say, where's the rest of the score, right? And then they'll take a closer look, and they might even look up in the parts and say, "Oh, brother," right? So really, like maybe this is standard for some works and some composers and conductors and so on, but like I've just really, in my experience, just stick to the standard numeration after the repeat. All right, don't get fancy with this. It can cause a lot of confusion during a rehearsal. You just want the least amount of preparation required by the conductor, by the because they've got enough to worry about, right? You want them to be focusing on how to play your beautiful notes, right? You don't want them to be focusing on little things like this. All right. So, all right. So, back to bar one. Let's start talking about some enhanced evaluation bar by bar. So this opening tempo / time signature, I feel there's a problem here, because this like with the way that you're offering this, it should be conducted in 2, right? It's the beat is not on the 4. It's not da 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 da. You know what I'm saying? It's not 1 2 3 4 and 1 2 3 4. It's 1 2 1 2 1 2. That's where the beat is. There aren't 4 beats per measure. There are 2 beats per measure, right? Which would make this cut time. And if we're going to get to that point, why not just leave it in 2/4 and just mark this 36, right? Leave it in 2/4, restore the durations to be half the length, right? That's just so much more helpful for the conductor, I feel. Now, here we've got just a couple of notation things. Piano dolce. If you have a second voice rest here, then the dynamic should be over the staff, right? Now the same thing is true of like 117, right? So this piano crescendo should be here, and then it could be forte below, indicating both instruments, right? So just wherever, like I would just say, proof this wherever you've got first voice entering a bar early, and a second voice rest. I would say put the first voice expression text over the staff. Oops. Now, yeah. So here you've got a clef change at the page break. I think you should put in the clef change either at the end of the passage that it uses the tenor clef, like right here, or you should put it right here at the beginning of the next passage, right? Because like putting it here, in the middle, it's not going to get noticed as much, and especially for the player, right? So like this might just end up in the part and arbitrarily split a multi-rest, right? So just put it either at the end or the beginning, beginning of the next passage, end of the last passage. yeah. Now here you're marking. You're doing this one thing that's kind of useful in a rehearsal, but like for like a permanent score or whatever, let's say that this would have published or whatever, you probably wouldn't need it. Like this is useful, like just to remind the conductor this is just like whatever. So so that's all good. I mean, I would say like if this were taking extra pains and so on and so forth, but then you have to make sure that they don't show up in the parts and so on and so forth. You might have already anticipated that, but yeah. Um, Now, let's jump ahead to da 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 da. Now, are you sure you want to do this? Dun dun dun. All right, what does Beethoven do here? Bum bum bum. Do you know what I mean? Like you've got so this it's not even that this doesn't agree with Beethoven's sense of proportions here. I don't think it necessarily agrees with your sense of proportions, right? You've got these beautiful smooth little gestures here with some attacks, punctuated by some attacks and so on. So I mean I feel that like just broad strokes here, right? Da da da. I feel that like this doink 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 is just a little too hoppy bunny for me. Do you know what I mean? It feels a little too abrupt, a little unserious compared to like because you've already got the lightness and so on and so forth. Maybe this is overdoing the good humor or the lightness of character, or do you know what I mean? It's just that it was just something that stood out to me, and then of course like it also happens at 123. Yeah. Yeah, so just watch out for that. I think Beethoven had a pretty good idea in his note durations before. So watch out about changing that. All right. Um, let's talk about. Oh yeah, there's this one little thing. The bar before rehearsal D. So like here you've got first ending, right? And we have the slur right there. So this should be a slur carrying over, right? So it could even cross the bar line if you wanted it to, right? Just to convey the idea that this is like this slur, da da, right? Or da. Um, and just keeping in mind that all of this enhanced evaluation is the intention of it is to get this ready for the stands, right? So of course there's going to be there's going to be a lot of little like fix this little notation thing, consider that proportion, etc., etc. And then of course I will be talking about each of these sections after this enhanced evaluation, like I did for the other evaluations you might have looked at. So yeah, so I feel like what would they call this in like in olden times? They'd call this. I feel a little bit like this is a tautology. Do you know what I mean? It's just kind of like the same thing again. So this is beautiful underneath your upper winds. But when you jump down here, just using the same thing again, I just sort of feel like, yeah, so what, right? Why not drop this an octave and go G, C in the fourth horn, right? Which are, once again, open pitches. And then take these two pitches an octave lower and give them to the bassoons, right? Right? So it's da dum ba bum. Right? Under. Right? So I feel you need to drop here in pitch. And I think you need to change the color of the accompaniment. Now, yeah, there were some wrong notes here. So yeah, so it's very minor. Just make sure that these are B naturals, right? Because it's a major resolving to a minor, right? It was so G major to C minor, right? Right, both times. Yeah, and then here, like here, you have this bass motion, going up, like augmented fourths and so on. So I feel that this is hard to justify without the context of the root on a C, right? If there was some way of introducing that C, like whether like maybe in the horns or in the bassoons or something like that, then I feel that this wouldn't sound quite so arcane. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's the kind of risk that Beethoven would have almost taken, right? But with the way that it's scored, I feel that you're taking him a little bit too far towards like Bartok, Reger, and so on, right? Like they're like it's kind of approaching late 19th, early 20th century with the way that this is scored, right? So take it back 100 years. What would have happened here is Beethoven would have like maybe had like a pad of octave C's in his C basso horns, or maybe like bassoons going C octaves, like bum 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 bum. So I just think that there needs to be the context of the C here. Just add it, and see what you think. See what you think. All right, now we've got this. So all right, so this is okay. The second flute here is going to really get swallowed up by the second oboe, but it's all right. It's just it's really kind of on the verge there. But then here, where you have the enclosure of the F on the flute between the two oboes, I feel that that's. I think you should reverse it. Stack these pitches. It's okay to have, it's okay to have like the second in your flutes. Like they play that kind of stuff all the time, and then a D third in your oboes. That will be a much cleaner, clearer harmony, right? And for that matter, you could go a duet with your flutes and a duet with your oboes as well, and get. I think that would also be a stronger timbre, right? But I mean, I understand what you're trying to do here. You're trying to split. You're trying to start from a unison and then split in two different directions. And it's the kind of thing where if you had this in oboes and clarinets, it would sound great. But oboes and flutes, the second flute, even here in the upper middle register, it's still, I don't think it's powerful enough. Right? I mean, without being tasteless for the second flute, right? Like there is a misconception that flutes can't play as loud as they need to in certain registers. They can, but the result is something that isn't really a concert music tone, right? Just ask Josh Plotner. Like he can blast with a flute in the lower register, but that's not necessarily a concert tone. Okay. All right. So we've got this very cool idea here. I really love this. This is what I've been suggesting in other evaluations. But here, like, and then you've got you know what I mean? Like, it's very powerful. And then the answer, though, is so weak. Sorry, I don't want to sound like what is his name, Uncle Roger or whatever. So weak. So yeah, it's so weak, right? It's just like that. I know that you're trying to do sort of a call and response, right? But I feel it's barely there. I can barely hear what's going on in here. I think this needs to be a little stronger. And then also this, da 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 in your strings, like an octave lower. I mean, if there's some way of bulking this up just a little bit, maybe it's a little stronger. It couldn't hurt. Even if it was just to increase the dynamics a little bit. Maybe you could even reverse the equation, you know. But I don't know. No, that doesn't really make sense because of the way you've set everything up. Yeah. So anyway, so that's my those are my my extended evaluation, my expanded evaluation, enhanced evaluation. No. So now let's get to the fun part, and that is the section by section evaluation criteria. All right. So, all questions of time signature and note durations and so on aside here. What we've got facing us is the issue of, does this set the mood effectively? And I mean, I feel it does, as long as you, Arne, are completely comfortable with the timbre of the violins emerging from out of the horns in a kind of in a like a new color kind of a situation, right? The issue is that, like, if you had intended this to emerge almost seamlessly from the horns, that's not what you're going to end up with, even with a smaller ensemble of strings. Because this really is going to be horn strings. It really is going to feel like a completely new color, even pianissimo, crescendo to mezzo forte, and so on. I love the molto ritardando by the. You might even start this a little earlier, right? Da 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 da. Da 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 fermata da 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 da. All right, so you could really yuck it up here, So yeah, I mean, I just feel I feel it's nice the drop down here to the F octaves in your lower strings, and the just wonderful use of horns and tenor register bassoons. You probably don't even need the tenor clef here. I mean, if your top note is F, it's like, is the is this is the character. But one of my deciding factors for using tenor clef is, like, whether the character of the passage is has a kind of a tenor register feeling. And even, like, things can use the tenor register without necessarily having a like that tenor quality of, like, sort of more soloistic, more chesty, more more out there. And I feel in this situation, you're just kind of accompanying the first horn and so on. So, again, I don't know how necessary it is. So, all that nitpicky stuff aside, and I love this little touch of clarinet, by the way. That's lovely. So, all that pickiness aside, I feel this is just very beautifully stated. So that checks that box. Now let's move on to the way that you stated this melody, right? So, melody starting with elegance. All right, so ta 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 ta. I think you could throw in the little, like you threw in a little, the little compensating grace note to end the trill. You could do that here. Dum at the end. Da da dum. the players are going to kind of want to throw it in anyway. I think you can just give them permission. Yeah, and of course it's just like this little, this little Haydn string quartet kind of idea, right? Just really, it's like it's a real kind of Opus 20 kind of a vibe here. Yeah. So I mean, it just really is a question of really whether you want this opening to be so, so simply stated, or whether you want it to be a little smoother, right? So, if you really want ta 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 ta, or whether you might want to slur this and slur that, right? Ta 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 ta. Because I notice, like, you take the same approach in some other places, like here, right? You've got the same exact scheme, but then here you're in a wind, you're using wind instruments, so here it's a little bit more slurred. So I think that if there's an implication here of a kind of a smoother sound, right? Then you might want to smooth it up here a little bit more. But, if you don't really care, then I don't either. So, but, nice little kind of a jolly beginning. So, like, in terms of a natural flow, I don't think that this is necessarily flowing, but it is, it has a very natural kind of, the feeling goes really well with the arrangement, right? And then here, like, expanding without clogging up. Yeah, sure. And, you don't have those little pedal points in the double basses or any other instrument. That's fine, just because of the way that you've decided to make this very, very limited in scope. It's perfectly fine. And natural transition to octaves. Like you've written the octaves into the repeating notes in the second violins. It just makes perfect sense. Very Haydn-esque, as I mentioned. And I think this is like, if you're going to put the trill in here and you have all of the staccato happening, then obviously this doesn't need to be slurred like you have in the at E, Rehearsal E. So I would say, I think this is a very successful way of interpreting that material, with it, just trying to score it for string quartet. And then, of course, we were answered by, the little Leggermente section. And, Arne, you have been watching some of these, and you probably have noticed me critiquing people for leaving Leggermente out, and I just don't see any justification to leave it out, right? Same as right here. I think this should be piano dolce, right? That's what Beethoven wants it to be, sweet, right? He wants some sweetness here, and he wants some deftness here. He wants the player to play as if it's just the easiest thing in the world to be brilliant, right? So you should give them the direction to be that way. Da da da. And then here you go, triplets, da 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 da. So this is an example of something that I'll probably point out more and more, and and just in general, you have this wonderfully symphonic approach, despite the fact that you have this beginning that sounds like chamber music. You are really thinking with a big symphonic paintbrush, right? And some of these little decisions are things that Beethoven wouldn't have done, right? He just would have had just a regular string section here. He might have more solo winds right in here, right? That wouldn't be out of character. But still, right? Like you make certain alterations to certain phrases and so on, like doing mezzo staccato triplets rather than the da 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 dum. Da 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 da, right? So I mean, it does change the emotional context, And I'm not going to say that I like it. Like this is something that I think is a really great change because I miss my 16th notes, and I miss the drop down an octave. But I think that it's justified by your vision here, right? I think like these triplets somewhat anticipate these triplets here, right? So if you really want some kind of symphonic linking, then you might want to consider like maybe also having this come in mezzo staccato as well, You just see what I'm saying? It's just like I feel that like there's more you could do to to carry through on certain expressive ideas. So yeah, you don't contrast between the lines. You do add a little harmonic support, but I really like the idea of coming in with a very fresh color here, right? So horn and the melody, first violins with taking the melody, flutes taking the melody. I think that's a very very nice progression of colors. And then here, like you just really keep it stripped down. I miss my little da da, right? The little lift up to the seventh, right? But like here, I mean, like you throw it in here with the triplet that goes the opposite direction, but I'm just not sure it's enough, right? But still, the question is whether or not what you do here sets up the little chorale that follows, right? And I feel that like stripping it down to three voices, you probably don't want too much support, too much harmonic support, or too much density in your clarinets and oboes or whatever, right? So just like if you're just going to have a clarinet and flutes there, beautiful, cool tone there, then it is really better to it's better to leave it as bare as you've had it. And I like the push to forte and then back. That's nice. That just really is going to have a nice, just really show some nice colors going into the middle register here for your first flute. And then coming out. This is another example of like where perhaps these dynamics could go on top, and then here you could have like say maybe a diminuendo from say mezzo piano or mezzo forte down to piano. Right? The players will try to match each other, but like at least you should give your second player a little bit of thinking ahead, kind of maybe even cue this right here in the seconds part so that they know like they know where they're coming in and why. All right, so lovely little chorale here, and then tutti strings finally. I mean there were tutti strings here, but yeah, but coming back, a little bit of horn, clarinets, and so on. It's a lovely color. And then bum 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 with the bassoons is so lovely under the strings. I would say if you're going to slur the bassoons, slur your strings. And if you really want that separated bows, dun dun dun, have the bassoons be separated as well. Just really try to have the expression here in these chorales as unified as possible for the most effective kind of approach. Right. Bum bum bum. Yeah, that's all scored very nicely. Really good in your natural horns. Right. And then I really love this whole first oboe plus the strings, and this is really really lovely. It's an example of like uniting, or excuse me, oboe. I meant to say clarinet. First clarinet. It's an example of like unifying the two colors together without overdoing it on the ornaments and any fast passage work. Just leave that to the strings, but you still get the sense of warmth behind the first violins. It's a wonderful idea. Da 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 da. Complementary timbre in the middle strings. Da 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 da. Yeah, and then you immediately cool off to piano with this bum bum. I'm not so sure this is necessary, but it doesn't have to be needed for it to be fun for you to add, right? Right, and then here this is just this looks, this looks a little weird, but it's for people who are not that familiar with this. This is just tremolo, but it's two beams over an eighth beam. There are the two slashes over an eighth beam, so that just means unmeasured tremolo. Yeah, and that's over the pizzicato of the double basses. It's just really lovely. So it's like you have so much more active bass motion than a lot of these orchestrations, including mine. Right? You are adding way more symphonic touches than I did, and I think that they work out wonderfully. Yeah, and that's just like the little tremolo in here with this, and like I really love the way that you don't overdo the patterns, right? You make them sort of more part of an evolving kind of a fabric. Just so cool, such cool ideas. Yeah, and then here we've got this, just such a great way of interpreting that. And also like giving the players a little bit of space to kind of recover, right? They're just not constantly hammering away quite yet, right? And these little triplets right in here with the cellos and so on. All right, and then this is barely enough. This all right. Now here you add a little bit of strength with your fourth horn, and then you've got, like, I feel that this should be a duet. Well, not, but okay. All right. So we have a slight problem here. Okay, and that is this da da is so close to the bum ba dun da dun da dun da dun, but you've sort of written yourself into a slight corner here because you've got. You got your oboes in between, or your oboes, like the way that they are situated, right? In harmony with the bassoons and so on and so forth. There really isn't room in the middle there to express this and you've got you've got these beautiful cascading middle strings in here. It's just really, really great. And then the tremolo string, so you just have like no other place to put your clarinet except for here. Okay, so look, the solution to this is what you did here, but you forgot to do here, and that is accent the stop notes, right? You seem to have rightly understood that it was the stopped note or the dissonance that is intended to be accented much, much more than the rest of the chord in the original arrangement, right? Those chords a few bars after letter B. So yeah, so and then of course like this, the accents here are just basically for flair. I would I would normalize them in the other parts, like shouldn't these oboes also be getting accents, right? Just proof some of this. But but this is the main thing. I think you could almost say like sforzando, right? Right? Just to make it even more powerful of an accent. So yeah, the same thing here. And then that will pull you out of it. I was about to say a duet, but like I feel like maybe you could go like flute plus clarinet, right? But I would want to avoid that phased sound of two clarinets in unison, right? It just has the very I mean, I don't feel like, especially, in this double octave with the fourth horn, I don't think it's the most opportune kind of a sound. But wow, you have so much going on here. You just always have something fantastic and exciting happening. So I feel that this is really like a wonderfully, like I mentioned before, wonderfully symphonic interpretation, right? And what I really like about it is that you come up with this very intricate scoring here, and then you go to a different type of scoring, right? So it really is its own passage, right? Da 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 da. Just so nice. And then this these, contrary motion to similar motion, right? And then to contrary motion again. It's just so, so cool. Right. And you're really trying to make your triple and quadruple stops as many open strings as possible and so on. I mean, it's still going to be some, because like the player's going to have to, they're going da 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 da, and then they have to figure out like, okay, I got to make sure I got my other finger ready to hit that C for the octave, then down, and then I'm gotta get ready to play the C third here with an E on the bottom and so on. It's like not the most opportune stuff, totally. Just like with, in the middle of a very, very fast passage, which is why I was just saying, like, look, you should, like, you could leave it up to the players to figure out their Davisian, non-Davisian, and so on. But I maybe consult with a string player on some of this. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I could just tell you what I think as somebody who studied violin and viola for a while, and I've got some familiarity with the technique, but I don't do it constantly every day, and I don't have to leverage something like this against what my daily regimen is of trying to work a score like this into like having to prepare the Tchaik 6 after doing opera the week before and so on, right? The string players are just constantly, and like that might make them really, really capable of doing certain technical things, but it also might just make it kind of a hassle, right? So yeah. Anyway, so consult. If you are a string player, great. If you feel that this works great for you, then fantastic. I will defer to your judgment on it. But I just feel like you need to maybe rethink the whole assumption that it's going to be a small string ensemble, so it's all non-divisi, right? I don't think you can count on that. So in which case, you should be the guy making the decisions. But that said, a lot of these quadruple stops and so on are pretty easy, especially this one. All right. Yeah, so, I feel that this is really nicely filled out. I like the introduction of the trombones in here. It's exactly right. These octaves right in here really help to punctuate what's going on in the patterns in your strings, right? And this is really lovely here in the bassoons over the double basses. Yeah, so I just feel it's all really, really nicely done. You're leaving space for your cellos right in here, and for the second violins above. So really, nicely planned out, and of course, like this wind pad behind it, that's all just total straight Beethoven. Yeah, I'm not so sure about this pa thing. Bum 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 bum, or bum 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 bum. But whatever, that if that works for you, it works for me. Okay, so getting to the C section, question new quality of tone. Well, you decided to go for mixed, like a kind of a mixed sort of sound here. I would say, like, pianissimo, little bit of support behind the clarinets. I'd say that is a new kind of a thing, and then shifting over to da 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 da. And I like this kind of picking up from the clarinet rather than dovetailing. That's a very fun thing to do. So this is all very symphonic once again, and especially I love the way the third the third horn finishes things off. So like I would say that like what you've got here is kind of an exercise in trading off between voices and between colors and so on, and I feel it's very successful. Especially like the cellos down here under your clarinets. So I mean, really, really, nicely thought out. The A flutes right up here, going up to these intervals. Just very choice stuff. Which is why I feel that this this is going to be very pleasing to the ear and unexpected and everything else. So I mean, I just feel that it's a bit distracting to go dun dun dun. Right? I think that you could just go ahead and just let Beethoven be Beethoven here. Bum bum bum, and then bum bum bum. But I mean, the two things don't really rely on each other, do they? I like the alternating colors and registers. Exactly how Beethoven has got it scored. And I love the little handoff here from bassoon to second flute, with just the big leap upwards here. It's very, very fun. Yeah, and then as this leaps upward, you add a little viola down here. Yeah, just that's so fun. An octave below, and then 2 octaves below. Yeah, and like, yeah, and then I already commented about how this could be, low note could be in fourth horn, and then the top 2 notes could be in bassoons an octave lower. Right? Both all parts an octave lower. Just as to kind of get the da da bum bum as the registers drop, right? And just to sort of also to avoid repeating yourself. Exactly. Because I feel that this, like repeating this, calls attention to itself. Right. That's the main thing you want to avoid. And this is very neat. The doubling first oboe with first flute. This would probably be stronger. The second flute part would probably be way stronger on clarinet and clearer underneath these instruments. And then also, this would be better off. It might be better off on clarinet, but I think it does work. Just sort of slipping underneath the clarinets for just a couple of notes. They're not going to be very effective, but it's going to be fun for the player, right? And then at least it's soft, right? And I like the slur followed by the staccato, slur followed by staccatos. So so once again, qualities of tone, contrasting timbres, character and weight. You are ticking all these boxes that are in the in my criteria. Handing off instrumental solos, right? Is there a consistency in here? Do you keep the line clear? Yes, you do. I don't think you need a due here at the pianissimo. Yeah, if the players keep it soft, it's not a big deal. It has a nice color, but it still, it might outweigh the pizzicato quite a bit. Some people might wonder, well, should we trade off to like second bassoon maybe? I guess you could do that. It might be useful for like to dovetail on this note to second say for like maybe like more of semi-pro regional kind of situation. But I'd say any good bassoonist can play all three bars in a row with no problem. Right? Okay. So now we have reached D. So let's jump back. We're going to actually look at E first. So let's jump back to and remind ourselves what you did at A, right? So we had the little string quartet followed by flutes answered by triplets and bassoons, a little bit of pizzicato support there. Then you had this little like very stripped down wind chorale here, and then just tutti strings with a bit of horn and so on, flutes and clarinets, bassoons and strings, and then double reeds, C horns, and so on. Right. All right. So let's contrast that with the recapitulation at E. Right. So just to kind of mention, like you decide to get very heroic Beethoven, bum 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 bum, and then right. So we can see that it's just really a completely different conception, right? And even just like what you're doing in here. And here, just so every single thing that you do is completely new, right? So so even if that's the case, I still want us to go back and reference like what you are doing a recap of, right? Because I feel that's very useful. And it's interesting that you've got kind of a double syncopation here, right? You've got bum 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 bum, and here you got that dun 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 dun. Dun. So yeah, so it's a lot of syncopation stacked on syncopation, but I just think it works really, really well because you get that kind of slightly raggedy effect that supplements for patterning, like left hand patterning and so on. All right, and of course you're completely changing the emotional context from like a very calm restatement to like a triumphant idea here, and very beautifully conceived in terms of the harmony behind these sort of string octaves and so on, and and then just really keeping the harmony very simple here, sharing it between the upper strings and flutes and clarinets. I feel it's extremely beautiful color, right? And good pairing up of bassoons with lower strings and so on. And this kind of big, kind of screeching quadruple stop. Yeah, and like the bum 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 bum. Yeah, and just very very nice horns right in there, and natural trumpets. And then this is really beautiful, the harmonized melody in here in your upper winds, and the motion here in your clarinets. It's so nice, and keeping this to a triple octave in your strings. It's just it just is the richest, most beautiful kind of symphonic scoring once again. I hope people aren't tired of the word symphonic because I'll be using it a lot. And I feel that this is very, very much Beethoven-like. Just you've really captured his spirit. And just keeping. Once again, I really think this is an example of where the contrast in dynamics is extremely necessary and also very much to the period, right? So you got the first violins just really stating this I feel that there could have been a little bit of crescendo here in all parts, right? But this is just really lovely. This bariolage, right? I think that works really, really great. So, for people who aren't really familiar with this, the players will set their fingers in a quadruple stop and then just like play over the quadruple stop fingering back and forth, right? I mean, it's not a true barrelage, which is like an actual bow technique, but it's the idea of playing across the strings and so on over a pattern. Yeah, yeah, really nice. And then this is extremely successful. The way you come in here with the trombones and the winds above, I feel this is also very, very Beethoven-like, right? You really stretch out the harmony that's expressed in the left hand across the whole, scope of the orchestra, or the wind section anyways, with some support from the winds, right? Yeah. And then we've got these like string octaves here, and then here your telescope, which is indistinguishable, right? Nobody's paying any attention to the fact that the second line disappears, right? Because of the richness of the accompaniment behind it. And then here you go opposite directions. This is beautiful with a little rump in the violas. So this is set up so beautifully, right? So, you know, ticking boxes here, developing material, reflecting further contrast. Well, it's not really the contrast that are the essence. It's the development of the material, which I feel is great. And then, of course, these winds, or this flute up here, is going to be absorbed into to a degree into the timbre of the first violins in a good way, right? So it may or may not be heard for its own right, but if it isn't heard, then it'll enrich the violins in a beautiful way, and really set up the power of this E flat right in here, right? It's really getting the ear ready for the jump up here. And then, of course, like right in here, increased dynamic impact is absolutely, absolutely great. Now, and then here we've got this, so once again, you are shortening Beethoven's note durations, and I feel, I'm wondering. I hate to use the word arbitrary, but like here I'm seeing full durations on winds, and here I'm seeing half durations on the first two. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just like it seems a little, maybe it needs to be worked out a little bit more, and especially if you're coming out of a very, these beautiful smooth triplets. Ta 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 ta. Ta 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 ta. I feel like the sense of triumph here lends itself more to longer durations. Do you know what I mean? I mean, and of course that's what Beethoven has in his piano score, because you're definitely going to get short durations here. I think you should match those short durations, even if you're going to go to eighth notes. Should still be staccato, just for the articulation's sake. Right, and then here, bum bum bum. I would want some of this to be Davies. Well, I don't know. The C octaves are dead easy, and so is the sixth. But yeah, I don't know. It's just like fiddly after a while, I guess. Like, what requires the most amount of practice, right? I mean, I guess it's all pretty basic. I shouldn't fuss over it so much, but I'm just, I'm just used to people getting, taking certain things for granted in terms of the capability of the players, and then coming back and saying, well, it just turned out in the end that like a lot of the triple stops and double stops that I assigned, I just like ended up being like one or two notes, just because the players didn't really have time to worry about this and that, So just, be careful about certain ambitious kinds of things. For some orchestras, it'll work out fantastically well, and people will just scoff and roll their eyes at what I say. And then some other string players might say, look, I just don't have time to learn all that, right? So yeah. But yeah, I love the like, you know, the dry pizzicato, the, you know, then the soft, you know, the softer winds and strings and so on. Pizzicato and winds here. I think you should go to staccato in the winds. Right, and then this little touch here in the back. These sounding Fs. Da da ba 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 bum bum bum. Yeah, maybe tenuto staccato here. All right. Now, let's jump back a little bit and look at the B section. Right? Even though it's obviously going to be orchestrated very differently. Here we had the wonderful idea of first clarinet behind the first violins, the complementary color of the middle strings, and then this very developed, you know, the tremolo and the, you know, under the flute kind of going a little nuts here. Wonderful, very symphonic scoring, bass motion being much more active. Your little in octave bassoons and so on, and then this very right, and so on, and then just really opening out in a new way, right, behind the like these the kind of pad of harmony increasing towards you know, these big riotous chords right here at the end. Okay, all right. So how does that recapitulation sit with the past E here? So here we've got this really lovely color, the triple octave. Da 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 ba da. Once again, complementary color here of unison bassoons and clarinets, and then here, like, you manage to shift the audience's focus from the triple octave to the just the, you know, it's like to the double octave or the octave. And it folds like the distance between the bassoon and the flute folds together because of the overtones of the bassoon. It's kind of sitting right under, like an octave under the flute. So like it just feels perfectly natural to the audience's ear, right? For this to suddenly be an octave, like to be one octave rather than two octaves apart. Da, 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 dum, dum. Yeah, and then here you're shifting around some of the functions, right? So the first violins are getting what the flutes played before, and the very symphonic in the violas, and once again we get some extended bass action here, but less intense than before, right? Because here you have your horns opening up, so you don't really need the extra emphasis. And I just really love this contrary motion here in the flutes. So just very, once again, very symphonic. And then in the flutes with a bum bum ba bum bum ba bum bum ba bum. With, you know, we've got our triple octave here we have our octave here in the violins, and then the you know, the interacting part below in the violas. Sorry. And, you know, bum 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 in your lower winds. So nicely done. Yeah. And then here, like, we flip it around, like, you know, and this answer here is under, you know, sort of undertoned of what happened before. But I don't think you can get away with not having accents on the I just feel this needs a little bit, like, I think the conception is good in a certain way, But yeah, yeah, I still feel you need a just a little bit more emphasis on the dissonance. Okay, you've got it here, but it's only going to last for a split second, right? Because of the tremolo. It just has that one little dig at the beginning of it. So you've got to have more emphasis on that, right? However you do it. You could have first bassoon and like third or fourth horn, right? Doing this like stopped open, right, for your third or fourth horn. So yeah, so just something needs to be a little stronger here, and I even think like the da 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 it needs to be a little stronger too. Yeah, and then this opens up beautifully, and it's very very similar to how you had it before. Although I would point out to you that like I think what you did before opened out a little bit more vigorously and a little bit more colorfully, right? If we just jump back there, like you can see you got trombones coming in, you've got these chords holding above, we've got the trumpets kind of honking away here and so on. Couldn't we, couldn't we jazz it up a bit? Hang on, I'm in the wrong place. Yeah, just add a bit more force here. I feel there's something missing here compared to what happened before. I'm not saying do a complete replication of what happened, but I miss the high. I miss the high winds. I feel like you could have maybe jumped up an octave here in your strings, or maybe had flutes grab the octave up there or something. It feels a little, and then I feel like right here this boom bum bum bum, also feels a little. I don't know. Obvious is the wrong word, but a little direct. Do you know what I mean in terms of like the. It feels. I just feel there's too much oompa there. Do you know what I mean? Maybe if there wasn't such a huge leap in register, right? So yeah, so I just think this needs a little more work, and this needs a little bit more work too, right? To make it the absolute spotless masterpiece, right? That you intend. All right, so one more kind of blast from the past. Let's go back to here, and we had this wonderful interaction between strings and winds, and just really building on each other, and then and then kind of shorter note durations, going up from bassoon to flute and so on to like a little flute chorale, and then working your way down very very nicely, right? Maybe turn this into clarinet, this second flute note, right? And then kind of some riffing around with the bassoon and so on. All right, so once again, we see that you have really kind of taken a different approach. Like just decided to go with, like what, as you say, wind quintet, which you just don't need, right? So once again, don't confuse your orchestra management people, right? Making the decisions. Like don't make them think you're going to hire a wind quintet. Okay. I really like this. See, I think this is actually a really strong point of, having the wonderful mixed timbre of all the different groups working together, and then here having a completely different approach, right? I think that works great. It shows a development of philosophy, of timbral contrast and so on. So I think that this is all works fine. Yeah, I mean it's interesting the way that you've got the bassoons in triple octave with the flute, right? Or the bassoon in triple octave with the flute with a with the bass part in between them in the clarinet. Right, yeah. Yeah, just so fun, and the way that you fold the flute part into the oboe. Yeah. And then here, I'm not so convinced by the staccato and the bassoons and the. But I mean, I guess no. It's fine because like you're really keeping the bassoon nice and emphasized beneath all of these lush strings. So yeah, so that's fine. And then this leading to the response here, right? Does not need to be also marked as staccato. I think that the separated notes is enough, especially with the crescendo to forte. Yeah, and then just a little touch of third horn in here. Bum bum bum. Bum bum bum. Very nice. A huge tutti here, right? There could be a little reinforcement here by trombones if you wanted, especially considering how like you don't really have a lot of lower support here because your bassoons are up in the tenor register and so on. Right, and then we just have like strings trading off to winds. Right, and then sticking with that with a bassoon underneath and so on, and then just kind of going to this very vigorous kind of scrubbing. Now, this, there's temptation for me to kind of say what I said before in other evaluations and say that this has a real kind of elbow grease kind of a feel to it, just like where there's really just a lot of, underneath the cellos and the violas. However, you justify it here with this I feel this is very, very Beethoven-like, and so this setting that up and not going on for too long, I think makes it all right for me, right? Just in terms of proportions. And then da da da. This could be slurred, I think, if you wanted. I would maybe unify the maybe everything could be in the winds could be tenuto staccato. Da 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 da. Yeah, that's very powerful and vigorous. Yeah, and I think that this is wise to cool off, right? And just like have this horn, this kind of horn pedal here with the Fs and a little tremolo pushing forwards and then dying off. And this is a really great way of getting back to the repeat with a little da 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 da. All right. And then piano subito, right? So it's exactly the right thing to follow this sudden kind of flash of temper here, or growing burst of temper. Right. Right, and then accented eighth notes. Everybody should have accents here. Yeah. Bum 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 bum. And once again, you do something that you did previously with the winds and horns kind of making this harmonic pad. It's kind of strange that this is tied to that, and then this has an accent afterwards. But I mean, it's all right. But just I would say give those notes that play, especially like this. I think this should all be accented, right? So that it's very unified in terms of intent. But just to go back here for a second, yeah, I like the use of the crescendo trombones right in here, and just like the scurrying strings right in here. I think that's extremely effective. We've got like the support here that we need. Duet flutes with first violins. So it's just enough, right? I mean, you've got so much force going on in all of the accompanying parts. And then, of course, we got bassoons in here as well. Yeah, I just kind of almost wish that there could be just a little bit more, like you could peel off an instrument here and an instrument there, or like even just, have a piccolo on top or something, just a little bit more. But like you planned it, it's balanced very well. It will work, but I'm just like, it's something that makes me worry a little bit. All right. Okay, so I think that ending is great. It's really fantastic. Once again, very symphonic. All right, so let's jump back to D. Da, 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 da. Very beautiful clarinet melody with a little harmonization underneath it. Very Brahmsian here. A bassoon, a little bit of horn. Yeah. And just the little, the little offbeat middle strings right in here. I think that also reminds me a lot of Brahms. So it keeps it's a way of reinterpreting the left hand patterns once again in a very symphonic way, a very orchestral way. And then here we've got the reverse. It's like a tremolo. It's like a measured tremolo, only like into each other, right? So it will sound da 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 da, but just slurred together, right? And this is so cool. Da 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 da. With pizzicato, an octave lower. And I love you coming in here strong, bum bum bum, and with very very short note durations. Here I approve. Dun 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 dun, and then bum 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 bum. See how much sense this makes because of the the implied, the implied canon here, right? So if this is in canon with that, then it has to start strong, right? So. Right. With and perfect. Bassoons and trombones. Exactly right. With the tremolo middle strings. And the 6-part unison here in your winds. You might be able to get away with just a single player in each, but I still love the idea of the very, very mixed color here. That's still great. Okay, and then bum 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 bum, and then and this is just really great the way that the winds pick out different little bits and pieces as the as the parts interact, right? And of course, I mentioned before this should be a B natural in the violas. Yeah, and just so sweet, the back and forth. Here's an example of where different articulation styles against each other work great because we just want a little bit of what's featured in the first violins to stand out a little bit in a different color, right? Accompanying it. So a different articulation pattern helps that process. And then these octaves. Then it's almost like the Paganini 24th Caprice. Yeah. Yeah. Right, and then a push forwards here, and I love the way that you just keep it in the brass, right, and the lower strings and bassoons and so on. I think that this is extremely successful. And then and then the push up here towards the recap at E, right? So so it's really really nicely done, Arne. Here I'm just picking through what works in your score rather than saying, well, try a little bit of this, try a little bit of that. But I think that I also gave you some feedback that you can use to, or take it or leave it, really. I mean, getting things ready for the stands, what does that mean, right? To a certain degree, you might say, well, it already kind of is ready for the stands, and in fact, it was performed a month ago, so I don't know what you're talking about, Thomas. And in fact, I am a conductor, and I've got my own orchestra, and he's like, I cannot sit here and judge you on that level, especially with some work that's this good, right? But all I can do is just say, like, prepare for the worst, right? Or, just make things as clear as possible, or fix this little note here, or consider this little notation thing, right? Yeah, because there's so much about this. This is so good. I love the here's an example of sparse but very very powerful use of the timpani, right? Because of the way that things are scored so symphonically. A lot of the work of emphasis is being done by the scoring. So you need less timpani than possibly, might be indicated, right? Just here and there. You might be able to use a little more here and there, but maybe you don't need to at all, right? It is a very sparse part, though. Yeah, and I think that you could use more timpani here at the end. But anyways, it's wonderful, and it's just really, really great. And of course, there's more to come because we're going to look at movement 2. But first, let's take a little intermission here, and yesterday we talked a little bit about some things that we actually see in this score in our previous intermission. And one of those things was the idea. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. Oh, geez, I'm suddenly blanking out. I should have made a note of the spot. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about tying tremolos to sort of unify the meaning, right? And so that the emphasis wasn't necessarily overstated in some pitches. So now we're going to talk a little bit about something else, and that is slurring over a group of tremolos of different pitches. So let's take a look at that, and then I'll see you in a little while for the next movement. In the intermission to yesterday's orchestration challenge video, I introduced the topic of ties on unmeasured tremolo. Let's go a little deeper in today's intermission and look at a couple of special circumstances in which ties might make much more sense to use than to leave out. From the early 20th century forward, the use of tremolo ties became more common, especially in film music where it's quite useful in providing an extra edge of readability and clarity for players and conductors on a tight recording schedule. Here's where I would say its use is at a premium if justified in context. A great example of this occurs in Danny Elfman's Batman score, at the opening of the cue 8M6, Alicia's Unmasking. From bar 9, fiercely accented tremolo notes outline various interlocking pitches of tritone harmony against obligatory frantic tiptoeing by unison bassoon family, left-hand piano, and lower string pizzicato. The staggered entry and then sustain of the string tremolo pitches necessitates ties across the bar, to make absolutely clear to the players that no additional articulation should occur at the start of the following bar. The effect evokes classic Hollywood suspense, plus, of course, Elfman's quirky charm and sense of humor. Another situation in which tied tremolo can help clarify the composer's intentions is when the part alternates between measured and unmeasured tremolo. If the engraving style establishes that unmeasured tremolo bars may be tied, and measured tremolos never are, as I strongly feel should be the case, then this can be one more factor in helping the player get it right the first time, especially if they're sight reading the music in a film recording session. Of course, the typical insurance in many cases is to spell out the first beam group or bar of measured tremolo before abbreviating, but when the music alternates frequently between measured and unmeasured tremolo, such precautions might well become tiresome and unnecessary for the reader. It's also been observed that tying extended tremolo notes helps to prevent miscounting. This is especially true in cases where the tied pitches change every few bars, and in positions that might be easy to mistake for one another in a careless or stressed reading. But for very long durations, say over 4 to 5 bars long, ties are less consequential than numbering bars. You'll frequently see some careless part engraving, such as the double bass part in the opening of Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra, penciled over with bar numbers by the players so as to keep their counting on track. If they can see at a glance that the duration, in this case of a tremolo low C octave, is for 14 bars, then they can count those bars in their heads as they watch the conductor rather than getting stuck on the page. With all these examples, caveats, and special circumstances, it's still important to remember that for the average concert orchestra section player, tied tremolos will rarely be needed, even in some of these cases. On the other hand, it's a convention that has so permanently seeped into general notation approaches that little harm is done by its use, and few players will raise the slightest of objections to it unless it confuses things rather than clarifying them. Special thanks to Timothy over at Omni Music Publishing for permission to excerpt a page from his edition of the 1989 Batman film score, which is really a huge and amazing compendium of orchestration to look through. I hope to release a video next year, taking a closer look at it, and even some deep dive orchestration study of one or two of its cues. But let's get back to Arne's Orchestration Challenge entry now. And don't miss the intermission to the next video in this series, where we'll look at Debussy's slurred tremolos. A really great follow-up to the previous orchestration, the orchestration of the previous movement here, Arne. And stylistically, I feel, you don't just completely take a different approach. One thing really does follow on to the other very well. You could really see them as a set, right? Let's get straight into the general, the general evaluations, the enhanced evaluations. But just to say that I feel you capture the spirit in a lot of places. There are a few places where I think you undersell things a little bit. The restraint I think is just a little too much for the actual temperament of Beethoven's intentions at times. But for the most part, I feel that you have a really great sense of drama here. And of course, the orchestration is actually, I feel way better in this second movement than the first. I don't know if it's a situation where you had more time to spend with this. Maybe you originally intended just to do the second movement and then you decided to do the first one at the last minute, or whether or not you did the second one at the last minute, but you just were more in a, in your happy place, or in your more creative kind of state of mind. So let's talk a little bit, just a few notes from the previous, just proof for Davies, non-Davies, unison, and so on. Just a few spots. You actually did, I think, way better in this particular movement in terms of like your entrances and so on. And you just really, really worked things out, I think, really well. Which is why one of those things that made me wonder whether or not you had spent more time on this movement. Or maybe, you were just on a roll by the time you got to it. And, but like there's speaking of notes from the previous evaluation, you don't need to write string quartet. It confuses things. Like I said before, the orchestra manager looking at a score like this might think, what he wants us to hire a string quartet in addition to the players. He wants the string quartet to be incorporated into the section. I can't afford to hire more people, right? Do you see what I'm saying? It's the, it's that kind of state of mind where where people can just misunderstand the smallest thing, and I've had that happen to me before. So, there's a, speaking of going to solo players, you've got, it's a cool idea. But I feel that there are there's like a potential here for it to be, for the proportions to be off, right? There needs to be an allowance for the relative proportions of projection, right? So, for instance, jumping ahead here, you have this massive push of sound, right? Now, what is it going to do by the time you get to here? There will be a huge wash of reverb in the hall, right? Of resonance in the hall. And then you're having one single player playing piano, right? Again, along with a bassoon up here. At what point is the audience going to notice that anybody is playing at all? Probably right around here, like towards the end of the bar, maybe the beginning of the next bar, right? So by having this, play so weakly, I think you're just setting yourself up for kind of for the audience to really not understand what's going on here, like for instance, it wouldn't hurt anything to mark this as mezzo forte, right? Because you are thinking, okay, proportionally, right? To have this big flash of temper followed by kind of these worrying doubts, as I've mentioned before. It wouldn't hurt anything for this to be mezzo forte, because that would actually be a good match for your bassoon at piano or mezzo piano, right? And then proportional to the fortissimo of the orchestra, it would be piano, right? So yeah, so just think about the capability of projection. I'll have some more words to say about the other section in a few minutes. I really don't have a huge amount of notes like general or bar by bar in terms of enhanced evaluation, because you really did such a great job on this. Just a couple little things. Maybe you might feel that I'm being picky, but I think that it's worth thinking about. For instance, like here you're using TP for timpani. Okay. Now, I guess here you're going with real Italian kind of note names, or sorry, instrument names, and then abbreviations. Just to point out that TP could be so easily confused with TPT, trumpet, right? Which is in some, right? And then here you have tromba, right? Which could be confused with trombone, right? So I feel that you might be going overboard a little bit on the kind of the more classic era definitions for instruments. I feel maybe clean it up a little bit, right? So just TIMP, timp, right? Is it's just better, even if you are aiming for some kind of perception of it being a period score. And then also here you were careful to say in C basso, which you weren't in the previous movements orchestration, and that's great. Okay, but you still have to say C period B period, small lowercase b period, right? So just C basso. I've got it in the notes. You can take a look at it. Now, one other possible thing I mentioned before of having a couple more pitches in your timpani, just going to a full set of 4 kettles, which I don't feel would hurt anything. And there are opportunities for, say, like a B flat timpani, like so pitches of B flat, and maybe thinking ahead to the first episode here, like a solid D, right? So D, B flat, C, and F, right? So that would be that would be a very typical kind of a layout. Okay, so those are my general observations. Now let's look at a few bar by bar ideas, thoughts. Okay, and my first one really starts at like 22 here, and I might mention some more about this as we go through the just the evaluation criteria to come. And that is, try to have things like this where you end all together to have the articulation be the same, right? So here you have staccato in your winds, and then just a single note in the brass, in your horn. So that means the horn is going to approach this note a little differently from the winds, unless they really decide, they have to make a conscious decision to match what they're doing here. And of course, like there will be an inference of staccato with just an eighth note at the end, and so on. But you could just solve the entire problem, get the meaning across in all parts by just scoring like instead of a staccato and so on. Seeing as this is the end of a forte passage, just scoring an accent for all parts, right? Boom, which would would fit in with the general temperament. Now, going a little further ahead, so here, I just feel like this is sort of underselling what's going on here. Forte piano, so it just really feels, and then following it even further with like getting softer and softer, right? Remember what I said before about the fact that you have a smaller sound picture, so you might want to have a stronger dynamic. So I don't think you would hurt anything here to have like this to be mezzo forte or something. Be like a more committed dynamic. What if this were mezzo forte and this were piano instead of pianissimo, right? Piano, mezzo piano, crescendo to forte, right? Then going to tutti. So yeah, I just feel it really does. I feel that it is so restrained that the dynamic impact is I just feel like we're missing something here. And I mean, speaking of which, there's something similar happening here. Following this first episode, just everything is so soft. And what's Beethoven dynamic here is piano crescendo and then getting to a forte and so on. So like this, you have the sense of momentum here, and you have the sense of kind of nervous energy. That's all great, but I just feel that they're seeing as like what is Beethoven doing here in the original piano score is he's setting up a forte piano idea, right? So he's pushing, bam. Do you know what I mean? It's like we're taking the teeth out of things right here. So just think about those dynamics, okay? Think about the drama here. You may be going a little too far over to the to the restrained side. Now, just sticking with strings for a bit. Here you say two solo divisi. Seeing as how you sort of set up this whole idea of the string group leaders being, being partitioned off to be like a string quartet within the string section. Shouldn't this lower part here be second violin, like the first chair, second violin? So concertmaster on top, first chair, second violin below, and so on, right? And then going to a tutti here. I think that's you've already got your player primed, right, to be playing alongside the concertmaster in soloistic parts or in small ensemble parts. So I feel that's probably a better option right here, and you actually would get possibly a better sound. I mean, of course, this is really really hard to quantify, right? Because the the assistant concertmaster, the person who shares the desk with the official concertmaster, often takes the duties of the concertmaster, because the concertmaster is not always involved in every single concert, right? And you'll even find some orchestras in which the concertmaster has actually done the bowing, right? But the assistant concertmaster has worked out the bowing rather than the concertmaster, because the concertmaster might be like a soloist who's touring, right? So the assistant concertmaster, the concertmaster knows they can trust the assistant concertmaster's decisions about the bowing for the section, right? So the assistant concertmaster will oftentimes be doing that work, and they'll get paid for it usually. So you have two players who are used to leading, and they're sitting right next to each other. And so in a situation like this, of course, you get fantastically great results. But then again, thinking about the real, the realities of, say, maybe a regional orchestra or city orchestra, semi-pro orchestra. There are some semi-pro orchestras that will just, just knock your socks off. Right? They're so good. One orchestra I would say is like, like there are orchestras that are like teetering between the identity of semi-pro and pro, right? I mean, they're semi-pro because they don't have the budget to hire their players full-time contract, right? Full-time contract players. And yet the level of playing can be so high, right? That you might have an orchestra like Orchestra Wellington here in Wellington, which I've been associated with for 15 years, more than 15 years, and like that orchestra was already great when I first started working with them. 2007 actually it was, and then it just got stronger and stronger and stronger. And like recently I've been going to some of their series concerts, and they're they are rivaling all the other orchestras here in New Zealand in terms of programming, in terms of quality of playing, leading. Mark today as a conductor is just absolutely fantastic. So, you just don't know, right? But then, the thing I'm trying to say, I'm really getting distracted here, is that oftentimes the leader of the second violins can be as good as the assistant concertmaster, right? So it just depends. Usually in like a top professional orchestra situation, the concertmaster and assistant concertmaster are really the two best violinists in the orchestra, if not the two best string players in the orchestra, right? But then like here in with New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, the principal second violinist is such a fantastically great player. He could be a soloist. He is so good. I've worked with him, Andrew. I've worked with him with the quartet he used to work with, Vesa, their concertmaster, and a couple other players. And so yeah, it was just it was like principal or near principal players all getting together, and and they would meet for coffee, I think, at this place across the street from the concert hall. And so they just named themselves after the coffee house, and they started playing quartets together. They were fantastic. So yeah, you just don't know. But then again, like the assistant concertmaster for that orchestra is also an incredible guy who could be a soloist anywhere, just no question about it. So yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Anyways, I feel like even though I've gotten really, really off track with this, I still feel that this is something that people need to think about. So I'm glad I spent a few minutes talking about it. Okay, so just sorry about the huge detour, but let's get back to the bar by bar evaluations. Okay, so jumping ahead a little bit to 120. Okay, so here you have this, everybody's playing softly, so you're thinking to yourself, well, like in a situation like this where everybody's playing softly, I can have the flute player come in the first octave and so on. and sort of lead the group as everything rises upwards. That would be true if you didn't have these horns here, right? But the resonance of the horns is going to cover the flute because they are so similar in timbral quality, and yet the horns are stronger, right? So seeing though as the second horn here is covering the same pitches as the first bassoon, you can just rearrange things for this first bar and have the give this part to the first clarinet, and then have the second clarinet take the first clarinet part as written, and then the first bassoon take the second clarinet part, right? And just sort of swap everything around. And then I don't think you would hear a single difference in what you intend here, except you wouldn't have that sort of weak, quavery flute sound in its first octave here to get overwhelmed by the and also the timpani roll. That's also going to eat up the strength of the flute here. Oh, geez. Okay, now 139. Yeah, so we have a similar situation here. Like here you intend the clarinet to sort of dovetail with the flute because you can see that the flute's getting too low. Well, the flute is already too low here, right? With the oboe in its sweet spot, and also being covered by tremolo, second violin, and so on, right? So as everything is planned out, this is good, right? Then when you get to here, it's better off just to have the first clarinet start with these pitches here, and you can leave the flute in or not, right? If you leave the flute in, you have to accept that it's going to be inclusionary. In other words, you're including it for the sake of the player, but not for the sake of the audience who can't really tell the difference, and it doesn't matter, right? So you could just cut this whole bar, right, and give this part here to first clarinet, and then it would be much, much more secure. Okay, so you have one little spot here. You sort of set up 6/4 harmony here, it's not always 6/4, but it's the sense of having C as the root, right, or as the bottom note. It's not always the root technically in terms of the harmony, but C is the kind of the pedal point, right? Okay, so here I think that it would be better if this stuck with the program, right? Because by going to the tonic here, you're really distracting, right? It's just suddenly, oh yeah, we were back in the tonic. Oh, now we're going to go with the C at the bottom again, right? So I would say just stick with 6/4, with 6/4 harmony here, right? And with the C, just to keep the C in the root. I think that's the best, and same especially with the timpani. Okay. And then one last little thing, and that is how to deal with this little idea here. Okay, first place, I think that the boundary should be double bars, right? So that the players can really compartmentalize this. And the other thing too is that you're not being kind to the conductor here, right? They need to give a preparation here to go to presto. So the players need to see some elbows here, some elbows and shoulders, showing them what the downbeat is and how fast it's going to be, right? And by having everybody just continue playing all the way through to the end of the bar, of course it's manageable for the conductor, but it's not really all that helpful, right? So if you want to make the life the absolute easiest for your conductor, have everybody share this last quaver rest. Everybody with a part that's continuing on, right? Just give everybody the quaver rest. I mean, except for players that are already, in a rest, bar rest. So give all the players who are playing things the quaver rest, and then give it a little pausa, right? And that gives the conductor the most amount of control here, right? They could just, bring everybody to a sudden ending, and then wham, then this presto will fall like a hammer blow, and it'll be much, much more integrated, and the players will be able to really see what's going on, right? Okay. So yeah, so once again, like you don't really need to mark open or half stopped or whatever. Like, I mean, unless you really specifically want, like, if you're telling modern players to play in a natural horn style, right? So I just don't. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, either they're going to be using natural horns and they'll know which notes are stopped or half stopped or whatever, or they will be using chromatic horns and they'll just make their own decisions. So this really is only needed if you just absolutely want them to, if you know they're going to be on modern horns and you're trying to sort of force them to sound, um, to sound, ancient, right? Which I just really don't think is like, nobody's really going to hear that this is a half stopped F and so on. Yeah, I mean, I think that you can just go ahead and just either be modern about it or just let the players, make their own decisions whether they're going to play, with a natural crook or not. Right. Okay. So now let us check out some evaluation criteria. Starting here at the beginning, this is rather fun. Boom, dun 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 dun. So you once again, like, here's where like it would be great to have a couple more kettles, right? Um, you could even like uh, you know say, like, sort of middle modern period orchestra or modern romantic period, excuse me, the middle romantic period orchestra, where there are tuners at the top of the on top of the drum, the kettle, little hand cranks. This could actually be a D flat, right? And then later on tuned back down to a D just with a quick twist. So yeah. So you could get the D flat and the B flat, right? Boom. And you could even go D flat, B flat, B flat, right? Boom, 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 right? And and it would just blend in with the sound of the other things. If you wanted to, you don't have to. One thing that worries me, though, is, let's say you leave the timpani out, you don't take my suggestions, it's perfectly fine. I feel that this thump here on the pickup is, or the half pickup is like, it's really solid compared to everything else that's going on, right? So you could have say you do have D flat here, then you could go boom and then end up on a B flat, right? Boom, boom, boom. Because here you go, brr, bum, bum, right? You can do the same thing here, brr, bum, bum. Right? Yeah, but I feel that the way that it is, especially following it with timpani here, I feel that the solidity doesn't quite match, right? And especially just throwing in this right here in the that last quaver going into the downbeat, it just really puts the pressure before the downbeat, right? Which is a little counterintuitive. It's just like the timpani, the bass drum here is going to be way stronger than you think in a live situation, I feel. So, the obvious criterion here is shifts of dynamics / registers imply contrast of texture. And of course, like, that's so obvious, maybe I shouldn't have even written it down, right? But I mean, it is a basic point of comparison, right? And departure from the piano score. So, I mean, also couldn't leave it out, right? So yeah, like horns, trombones, I feel is a really good combination. A little punch here from the upper winds, and then the rest of it just like strings, bum, 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 octaves in the in the violins and so on. And this is very easy triple stop. So this is something, for instance, you would not need to mark non-divisi. This maybe, maybe not. Then dun, 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 with just middle strings. That's nice. And then yeah, just really lovely, lovely ideas. Nice and warm in the center here. The little touch of timpani. Yeah, I think that works really, really great. And then, answering with a little wind chorale. Da, da. You could cut the tie here and then just get the articulation from all instruments here. I don't think it would hurt anything. Right? Because, what does Beethoven do? He doesn't have any ties here, right? You're just kind of holding on to this sounding F, right? I think you could cut the tie. Then yeah, I mean it's a nice articulation kind of a strategy right in here. Yeah, and then the little yeah that all works really great. And this is at 138. It's this is all very easy single tonguing the oboe and the clarinets. And I have recommended in the past, maybe a little moment of uncertainty or restraint, possibly having a little meno. But I think that the way that you've set everything up, you don't really need any of those things. You don't need any little gaps, little pauses between, between the main ideas and the little, the little intervening, ideas connecting passages and so on. You don't need any of that. You pretty much have interpreted it according to one kind of pianistic interpretation. Yeah, and then kind of going into this, right, and then just opening this out as you add the measured tremolo, and then bum bum bum. Yeah, so this is just this is one of those things where you have TP under chorus and F and chorus in C, right? Do you see this is a place where an unwary conductor could easily confuse this with a trumpet part, right? If they just weren't paying attention. So timp, right? That will take away all confusion. Yeah, and then this is sort of an expansion, and I really love these, the portato offbeat right in here. This is so great, and the bassoon and cellos. I would say maintain the staccato here. Right. If you're going to go this far with the staccato in your bassoon, then I think you should do it here. And if you're going to add the cellos here, I would go to a due at this point. Right. But the horn, just this little touch of horn is great. Yeah, and then accent, right, and so on. Yeah. So all right. So Arne, you have watched a lot of these evaluations by now, so you know what I'm going to be saying next, and that is that that incorporating the onbeat into some of your patterns would really, really be helpful for the players, especially if the conductor decides to push things up to 144. They'll start to feel, oh, the orchestra's doing so well. And whenever I played this piano sonata, I always felt that it needed to go faster than that. So let's go up to 144, and then these connecting passages start to fall apart because you haven't, let's say that the orchestra is say a good regional, right? But not world class, right? So you're asking them to do a kind of a world class, interpretation of timing at that faster tempo. Do you see what I'm saying? So, if you just stuck in the onbeat as just a little teeny, even a little staccato note or something, but just some kind of pacing thing, right? So if they were going bum da da, Or you could even just go da da da, and then the other then going to the first could be da 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 da, right? That could be like a full thing. It doesn't have to go, it doesn't have to imitate the hands quite so much as it does. But here, like, you're sort of grouping them together because of the similarity of the duties. So you're thinking, oh well, these two things, since they're in the same exact place, better just to have the second violins handle all four pitches. But actually, it's the timing that is the problem, not so much the pitches themselves, right? The pitches, whether you're repeating, going back and forth between two alternating pitches, or you're playing four pitches in a row, the thing that is the difficult thing is to absolutely get the super precise timing, right? It's really helpful that you've got the pizzicato in here, right? Because that really does help the players pace themselves, but still, da-da, like that's the constant da-da, da-da, rather than ta-da-da-da, right? Right, and then right in here, like, I just wish there, like, this is really where I would say, if you could just, throw in the on beat, for this poor flute player, and then here, remember I was saying, like, the limit for having offbeat kinds of things is really like 2 or 3 bars, right? Going towards the end of the connecting passage. So here, that's fine. Just like the way that you've scored it, that's totally cool, right? But just like this thing right in here, just once again, just trying to keep everything absolutely electrifyingly right on the nose. I would give your flute player these on beats, right? Just as little staccato notes, all right? And then here, you can let go of that idea. And this also, this I think that's fine. You don't need any on beat kind of stuff there. It's just like the Beethoven is playing on the edge of fragmenting everything into these little gestures, right? So you don't want the fragmentation to literally take over, right? Here I think you could go to treble clef. All right. So at this point, we're going back to the first half of the main theme, right? So this is the point at which we're going to jump back and just once again refresh our memory about what happened, and then we're going to compare all of the strategies to one another. All right. So here we had the sort of big tutti chord, then F horns and trombones plus the strings alternating between middle strings and so on, then full strings, the timpani and the middle winds. Once again, back to just the string group, answered by winds, and then this opened out, right? Okay. All right, so now back to that same idea here. So here we see, like as we did before, that it's just a kind of string quartet kind of idea, which doesn't need to be mentioned. It's as plain as the nose on your face, right? That is exactly what that's intended here. And you just, and I feel like just these little touches of flute here really keep it fresh, right? I mean, you could have like da 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 bleep da da bleep da 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 bleep, maybe in piccolo, but I'm actually glad that you didn't, because that's kind of overstating it, right? But this is lovely. Once again, just like bring up the dynamics, because you're thinking of the overall projection of different groups in the orchestra rather than the pure dynamic level. Like whenever you cut the strength of the strings way back, right? So, I mean, of course, the players might be playing out anyways, but like I would say don't just give them permission. Make them bigger, because if they are literal, and the conductor is not paying attention, then it's a recipe for disaster, right? Accented mezzo forte, maybe. Okay. and then piano, mezzo piano, crescendo to forte. Right, and then yeah, and then this is all this is a lovely little interpretation, going forwards into the second half of the main theme. So we'll look at that. We'll look at that later. Okay, so the next part is double E. All right, and here we have something that's very similar to the opening, except it's at least in terms of like there being a big tutti chord on the downbeat, right? And and here you decided to kind of go for like to really underline the F, bum bum bum. Of course, you can take advantage of the fact that the harmony is different here, so it's ending on an F, right? So that's all fine, and a little touch right here of piatti. Yeah, I mean it's just nice. I mean once again the your natural brass scoring is pretty nice here. There isn't a huge amount of C trumpet, but there's just enough. Do you know what I mean? There's like just enough to keep to justify its existence. You have like one C trumpet, just barely, right? Um, so the tutti winds, strings, and horns with a little trumpet, right? It's pretty much a tutti without the trombones is a easier way of saying it. And then answered by trombones, bassoons, and double basses. I feel that that's really powerful. And then this is a little weird. I'm not so sure that you need to do this super restrained thing. Like here's another place where I think the restraint, like if this is going to be restrained here and there, you don't need to pull back here so much, right? Because what does Beethoven say in the piano score? Forte, right? Now you don't have to follow his dynamics, but I just feel in terms of the drama here, right? Like if this is understated, then there's less impact here, pulling back in the same groups that you did before. And then love the little flute note here. And this once again, just like that we had with that other clarinet tone, this could be you could cut the tie here. And bum 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 bum, and that's all. That all works great. All right, so let's jump ahead to 150. And this is sort of kind of combinations of things we've seen before. Strings, a big hit on the on the downbeat with our upper winds. Bassoons, just like and the brass section working together. Nice use of natural pitches. Despite the weirdness of the harmony here. Ba ba bum, and then bum bum. Yeah, I love that contrasting with the double reeds. Yeah, and then this is very similar to what happened before. Nice warm reeds in the middle of the strings, and that same kind of rolled timpani as before, but some horns this time. Answered once again by double reeds. Yeah, so it's a very cool idea. And then and this is just very as sweet as can be. Flute, clarinet, and horn. Right, pianissimo. It's very very wise. Da 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 da. Slur maybe. Da 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 da. Unless you really want that da 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 da, which actually kind of makes sense with the way that you've got the the melody scored out here. So maybe don't have a slur there. All right, so now let's look at the second half of the main theme and how it was scored in different contexts. So like the main thing is that this is smooth rather than awkward. I don't know, like I mean, there are smooth elements to it, right? The slurring of the way that there's an onset here, and like and then there's also like a very kind of a spiciness. Um, just if your conductor decides to go lickety split, it wouldn't hurt at all to have this on the beat, rather than da 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 da. Just have it ta da da da. Right? Yeah, but yeah, you just nice. Yeah, and then and the way that this is scored is very very reminiscent of the episodes, right? Ta da 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 da. Right. Yeah, that's very very clever. Look at just looking forwards. Yeah, and there's da 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 da. Yeah, yeah, all nicely scored, really good proportions. You're not burying your flutes. You're not pushing your oboe too high. It's just a lot of just very sensible, straightforward scoring. That I mean, I wish I would see more. To be honest. Okay, so that was our main theme once again. So now let's jump ahead to 43. Right, and this is all really playable. Just the string quartet version of it, right, and then going to tutti, right. Yeah, and this is of course unmeasured tremolo. Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like the crescendo could because looking at the context of string quartet pushing forward, right, and then suddenly just dropping down with like watch out about understating things, underselling things so much, right? Once again, maybe you can drop back down to piano, but maybe start the crescendo a little earlier. All right. Now, there's one more of these, bar 100. Hang on, one bar back. Yeah, and just once again, it's just strings. Yeah, and some similar strategies as before, but different enough to where it's a fresh approach, and then piling on with the winds and so on. Yeah, yeah. So what does Beethoven say? He wants things to be strong, right? By the time he gets to the end of the second bar, right? Bar 101, he's expecting the pianist to kind of play with much more force, right? So once again, like we have a situation of kind of underselling things a bit, and of course you don't have to stick to what Beethoven did, but I think that when you back off so often, right, there are 6 examples of you backing off rather than following Beethoven's sense of drama, and so the danger is with Beethoven already has a ton of restraint in his music, and that's what allows his flashes of temper and his passion and his ebullience to become so effective, right? So I'm feeling that if you temper even that, then you're possibly courting trouble in terms of expressing things dynamically. And that's not to say that I don't like this just sudden jump forwards. I mean, I think that's very very cool, and I feel it's incredibly effective. But once again I don't know. It just feels I'm not feeling the dramatic arc, right? But the scoring is great. Okay, so the next thing on our little menu things to look at are the connecting passages. So let's jump back to bar 22. All right. And once again, like, I don't think you need a pausa or any kind of thing, And I've already talked about how it would be better just to go bump da da da, right, and then have da 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 in the other in the first and so on. Right? Just better to have on beat kinds of things. And we looked through this and sort of picked through the efficacy and so on of maybe making the flute a lot more on the beat, and so on. Okay, so we were just looking right here at something similar. So this is very, very cool. I love the push right here, and then the so seeing as how you have something really, really similar at 110. Slurred. Are you sure that you don't want to slur here? Right? I mean, you don't have to. Just because you don't have to make them match up. I will say one thing. It would just be easier, and it wouldn't hurt anything at all to just go straight to C an octave higher here in the violas, because you've got the cellos coming in here. You don't need this to dovetail just to make things even. I mean, it doesn't really matter a whole lot, but it's just cleaner to have the violas completely doubling what's going on in the second violins here. So yeah, I mean, this all works fine, and I really like the dun 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 dun. I think that's very, very effective, and then just going straight to the boom. Yeah, so that's all good. 74. Oops, I keep jumping ahead too far. And and then I already talked about this being a little too restrained, right? I mean, I just like Beethoven really set up a beautiful fortissimo kind of, and then restrained thing. He actually wants it to be fortissimo and then continuing on loud, and then but the scope of things, of course, is much smaller. I love the trombone pad in the background. I did something similar. Yeah, it's very cool. That all works for me. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so just look, once again, if this gets pushed by the conductor, and then actually the conductor might want to push it, but decidedly not go as fast as they think it should go, because you have set up some traps, right? So once again, like this sort of I mean, it's good for a few bars, right? So I would say like maybe like this much, but like this much is a little much, right? So, I mean, it'll work, but it's just not very clean, Arne. Yeah, I mean, you're just kind of limiting the level of orchestra that can play this, right? Just to top notch, and that's it. I mean, it's a level of precision, and I mean, it's a level of absolute precision that, like, I mean, maybe like the last movement of the Fourth Symphony, right? Or other places like that, right? The opening of the Fourth Symphony, fourth movement of the Ninth Symphony, right? Which let's not get into. All right. So, and then we talked about this. This is all really nicely done. No notes. Okay, I think it really, really works great. And then using this open C down here on the violas, that's just very, very canny. Right. That all works for me. I like the push forwards here in a bassoons and timpani. That's all fine. Okay, and then bar 133. Right, which has got a built-in pausa, just like before. And then yeah. And so notice here, like, this all works great, right? I think just apply this to that previous, to the section of BB, even though it's different pitches. And this is very, very cool what you're doing here in the violas. Yeah, yeah, that's all works really, really great. And then here, like this, to go G point, right? B flat point, E point. Yeah, and then you could even do that a little bit with piccolo, right? Just give them this G point. Yeah, just little little things that help them to stay on track. So here I would say, like, reserve the complete freedom for the last 4 bars, but somehow try to work in some kind of pacing, some little pacing pitches if you can. If you can't, like, here you've set a trap for yourself. There's just like nowhere you could put in anything that's played in another part that would help the piccolo player, right? They're SOL here, right? So just really be careful, because like it's scored in a way that there isn't any way to help out that player. And it's a very, very long, like the longer these these passages get, the harder it is, right? Like the first one, not so bad, right? It's like about 10 bars, 11 bars or something like that, and then we add on a few bars, and then it's like this next section is almost twice as long, before it gets back to more cohesive playing. All right, well, we don't need to dwell on that too much. Let's go back to bar 57 and talk about the episodes, and then we'll look at the coda. Okay, so, one of my criteria was, consistency of strength rising, right, through the instrumental registers, and I feel that you did that very well here. Most of it really is in motion rather than in filling in until you get to right here, right? So there isn't any step up, but I mean there's enough here with the trombones so that it's not such a big, huge crisis. And this is much stronger than what's followed with the flute and so on. And the thing that I really love here is the power, right? And this is where I just feel like if you just had a third kettle tuned to D, you just have so many more options. Boom. And yeah, and then just once again, this could be mezzo forte, just for your solo part. Right, and then just kind of the same thing again, but with octaves. Yeah. Yeah, and then, then this is very, very cool too. Yeah. If you're gonna use this approach, I think you should just do that here too. Just slur by the beam group. Yeah, and this all works fine. But once again, the problem is the restraint, right? Yeah. But it's really nicely orchestrated. Yeah. Yeah, I just feel that, like, you've got accented staccatos with the piano, right? Rethink the dynamics a little bit here if you can. All right. Smooth and not awkward, you definitely achieved. Maintaining nervous energy. I think that the nervousness of the energy would be much more evident if if the dynamics were allowed to increase the way Beethoven intends, and so on. All right. So now let's jump ahead to 116. Oops, a little too far again. All right, so you start off, you know, very nicely, the clarinet and the. Actually, just to jump back, I just want to check something. Back at 57. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Yeah, and this is nice and powerful, and I like the. This is very similar to what happened before, but this time we've got more timpani. Seeing as how you've already got you've already got the feeling of tremolandi here. I mean, do we need a roll in the? Would it be better just to go bam? With to have like a punctuating stroke rather than a rumbling, kind of rumbling thunder here. Or if you just really love this roll right here, could we just throw in the gran casa right here and go bam? Right. But I really love the way that you just gather all this energy and it goes boom at the end. So maybe it doesn't really need it. And then this is very cool for your nervous energy. For here's where your C trumpet really justifies its existence. It's really nice. Okay, I'm not so sold on this. Like, once again, this is another example of you pulling back on the energy where Beethoven intends it to be strong again, right? I know you don't want to repeat yourself. You don't want to be boring. And that allows you to bring in your horns and trumpet and so on a bar early. I totally get it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, look. That's your choice and so on. I get it. Without trying to control or counsel you to do things differently, that what I will say is that this is not going to work with the way you've got it scored. If you're bringing in the lower and middle voices so powerfully below crescendo, even up to a mezzo forte, with these parts being at piano above, everybody's got to go crescendo to mezzo forte, or else this won't work dynamically. Sorry, my cat is snoring. If you just sort of grunt. All right, and that just leads forward. So I see this is just so much more powerful than the previous treatment. Yeah. Yeah, and these offbeat C horns. Yeah, very, very nice. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, that's really, really nicely done. I mean, you have such great ideas. Here I'm like, saying, hey, this might not work the way you think it is, or, I don't know if the proportions are great here or whatever, but like your general strength of orchestration is quite, is quite intense. I think it works great. Okay, so let's jump ahead to the Coda. So 159. All right. Actually, just to review. Da da dum bum bum ba dum bum bum. Da 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 da. Bum ba da 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 da. Bum ba ba bum bum. You change the harmony in here a little bit. It's okay. It's okay. Just really be careful about recontextualizing Beethoven's harmony if you want this to sound period perfect. Okay. Just watch out. You might want to rethink that in light of that. So building forward with graceful poise and cooler colors. I think that absolutely you do that here, right? Natural emphases. I think that those work out great. This might be a little much. Especially if you like drop it, right? Okay, and then I had a critique or a criterion saying not getting too hot and you pull back. I think you need to pull back in all parts, right? I don't think you can just go diminuendo in your brass and then leave these guys hot. There needs to be diminuendo across all parts. Yeah. And I think you can start your poco ritardando a little earlier, just with the way that you've got things scored. Yeah. Right, so like with the way you've scored it, you could start your poco ritardando maybe halfway through this bar. Yeah, but very cool. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like this what you've got happening here in the cello needs a little bit more support a little earlier. Do you know what I mean? This your first your first bassoonist is kind of not really doing a whole lot here, and a lot of their stuff is supported by other people. Maybe first bassoon could do a little support here of cello instead of just kind of playing octaves that other people are playing. Yeah. Yeah, I love the flute here. Okay. And then this little run up here and to the roip. Yeah, so this is nicely supported. Yep. Yeah, I mean, you've decided to sort of limit yourself down to one flute and one piccolo player. There's a lot of places where I think a duet flutes would have helped a lot, like here, for instance. So, anyways, maybe something to rethink. But I mean, it's not hugely needed, but it's still, you know, it still is something that wouldn't hurt a little bit of thought. And then and we already talked about this a little bit. I feel that this is very, very cool. Da, da, bum, 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 bum. So strings and horns, and then reaction by your winds. And then da, like if you have a little breath here, little gasp, I think it's just so much more effective. And also, we get to have a few little elbows and shoulders here to guide people into the presto better. Just I mean, this is a variation on what Beethoven wants, right? What does Beethoven want? He wants forte and then fortissimo, right? But I mean, I can see the pressure, the way that kind of just kind of pushing forwards again, and then triple F here. If you're gonna say triple F here, in your F horns, trombones, and so on, and then not everybody else, I don't think you need triple F here. Seriously. You've got the accents. It's all you need, right? Maybe you're not getting what you needed from from your mock-up, but I feel that this is excessive, right? This will just really, really blast, and especially at presto, it's I feel it's a little over the top. Just let everybody continue on fortissimo to the end, and I think that things will balance really, really nicely. And like no need to mark non divisi here. I think that's really obvious. Okay, so wow, all right. So that those are my thoughts. Take them or leave them. I think you did just a really fantastic job here, though, and I mean I'm so happy that I'm able to to get my health together and to finally comment on this excellent score and on your effort and give you whatever guidance I can. And people develop so quickly in their ideas and their approach and their craft and everything. You might be so far beyond this that you're looking back and kind of thinking very impatiently as I go through every point, like yeah, of course that's right, I would never do that way now, right? Or you might be thinking, oh, I'm one step ahead of you, Thomas, because I have figured out an even better way to do it, and I've already fixed that part and it's even better than what you suggest, and that's fine too. I'm not I am not the ultimate arbiter of taste, orchestration, and everything else. All I can do is just say, how could I possibly help you improve it? That's all. So I think you did another fantastic effort here, and you know, look, thank you so much for your patience as I try to kind of keep things together, hold things together. There was a bit of a delay. I was planning to release this about 2 weekends ago, and I'm happy that I was able to pull it together to release it by the end of December. I know that I mentioned, like, next week there will be another there'll be another couple entries being released. Maybe that might be a little optimistic. I am organizing everything, and a lot of the materials that are going to go into that video are actually already completed and ready to go. But there's, of course, it just depends on a bunch of other things. Yeah, my health kind of taking a sideways turn a couple weeks ago put off other things, and I don't know. There's just a lot to juggle. You know what it's like. Anybody out there tackling any kind of creative project, especially dealing with clients and dealing with health issues and so on. So I don't need to get into it, but anyways, just everybody stand by, because there's more good stuff coming soon. And I was just I just thought that those tips that I shared this weekend were so fun about tying tremolo and not tying tremolo and so on. Yeah, as I mentioned in yesterday's release, Justin Tokke had he was seeing the topic come up so much in Orchestration Online that he made his own video about it. And his thoughts are a little different from mine, so I feel it's justified in having another perspective on it. And then Tim Davies' post doesn't quite talk about ties so much, but it has really great perspectives on tremolo. So anyway, so think about all that stuff. Yeah, thank you again, Arne. Thanks everybody out there who's made it all the way to the end of this really, really long video. I appreciate it so much, and hopefully things will all be organized and ready to roll next weekend. And if not, we'll just take another weekend to get it done. I know the holidays are coming up, and just everything is going crazy, and I've got this one little minor project that I'm also working on right now. So anyways, everybody hold tight. Hope that at people in North America, hope you had a nice Thanksgiving weekend. And I will see you guys next week, hopefully, and if not, the weekend after.